All right, eye sculpting time. We are starting off with a skeleton for the ears and some of the others. Like the skeleton isn't that important, but for the eye, it's super important that you get the skeleton right. At least that you get an overall blocked-in part of it. You don't have to have all the landmarks or whatever, but at least get this part right. You want the general area around the eye so that you can get a cavity for it. This is so that you just know where you're going to put the eyeball.
Yeah, if you don't get that in, especially when you're doing it, so when you're not doing it in isolation, you're doing it on your complete faces, it can be really hard if you don't define the skull first. What's the correct size? What's the correct spacing? These things can be really tricky to figure out if you don't have the skull in there.
Yeah, this might be the number one beginner mistake to see what people are doing eyes is they don't define the skull. They start straight off with... They don't even have all the stuff we talked about in the theory. They start straight off with just the top eyelid and the bottom eyelid. Then that's it.
I think what I see the most from people that mess this stage up is that they kind of perceive eyes as like a drawing. So they'll go in, they have a mostly flat surface, maybe they have some indentation, but then they'll go in with the Damien standard brush and just sort of like draw the eye instead of try to think of it as a shape where they actually sculpt the eye. That's something I've seen a fair few times.
I think that's a good point. They regard it as line work instead of volumes.
Yeah.
So what we're doing here is actually blocking in where the eyeball is, because it's so important to have the eyeball there, because everything wraps around the eyeball. And then for the eyelids, just masking it out. I mean, there's a million ways of doing this. I do this differently every single time. I don't have my way of doing it.
You come up with something new every time, like, that's good, that works.
Yeah, like the masking method here, it works.
I think that's a good technique because it allows you to get thickness and it allows you to get the shape of how it wraps around the eyeball really quickly. Yeah. And having an actual sphere in there, like an eyeball, just really helps you settle it in the head a lot easier. So you should definitely do that.
Yeah, I think it's so important that you have the sphere, because otherwise you're going to end up with something super flat and it's never going to look right. That's, again, one of the bigger issues to see.
Usually in traditional sculpting, you would just add it. You would add the volume of the whole thing.
Yeah.
But you see it a lot in miniature sculpting when people do these tiny puppets, or if they do like celebrity sculpt super tiny, they'll actually put in a little ball just for the eye. And then they can wrap the lid around that.
I know that we're doing an old person, so that's why I'm blocking in stuff like the fatty pad right now, which is really heavy fatty pad, and blocking in the main big wrinkles fairly early, because it's such an important part of the volume.
Yeah.
But you really don't want to get into details, or like fine details too early. And again, look at reference. Look at yourself, find people. If you have a grandpa around and you're doing an old person, get a grandpa.
An important thing to note here is that the upper lid will stick out compared to the lower lid. You'll have this little subtle angle from top to bottom that goes inwards. Just a little note.
This is why we were so clear on the theory video, where we're talking about all the various parts. Because right now it might look like we're just thinking about the eye, we're just carving it out of nothing. But whenever you're sculpting anything like this, I'm always thinking about the specific parts which we covered. All the colors you saw. Right now I'm thinking about the fat pad, and I can see that as an older person is actually going over the top lid as well. They're two very separate shapes. Even though, let's say this pad were to cover the top lid entirety, you would still have two separate shapes.
Yeah.
And even if you can't see the top lid at all, it's still important to have it there, because the fatty pad would be conformed by the shape of the top lid.
What you can search for if you want to find some reference is, because this is prominent not just in old people, but in a lot of people, also younger people, is just Google hooded eyelids, like a hood. So hooded eyelids, that's the term for it. And then you'll find a bunch of different variations for it. Not everyone has it. Some people have a more recessed eye with the eyelid. And one example we used in another tutorial was Cher. She actually has more like pop-out eyes. They're not connected as much. So that could be a good reference to look at something where you don't have hooded eyelids.
Yeah, and some people they have such a hard time with the fat pad on top that they actually can't see. I know several people who's actually had surgery because they couldn't see it. In Norway, you can even get it like state sponsored, just because it's not even plastic surgery just for the visuals. It's because it actually impairs your vision because you can't see what's going on there.
My mom had that, I think 2 years ago, something like that. And it's just something like the lid, that kind of lid, that heavy top lid or heavy pad up there is just something we have in our family. And a couple of years ago, it just got, to the point where it would actually impair her vision, just naturally. She couldn't see as much.
Yeah.
So
turns out if you cover up the eye with fat, you actually can't see that well. Everything we blocked in the beginning, it's still very important. Like right now, we're still just defining the skull a bit more, and we've gone around several times and just refined the skull a bit. Because if that isn't working, then you have literally no structure for anything else. Getting in the caruncle as well, like we talked about in the theory video, just a quick block in. And also just blocking in from the inside as well, just blocking in the thickness of the eyelid. I think that's pretty important, because then you can clearly see where the eyelid begins and ends.
And it just really helps you with settling the eye within the eye socket as well. Just makes it look better.
Yeah.
One thing you can do for the lids as well is use a flatter brush, because there's not a lot of roundness to them. The plane change from the lid where it meets the eye to where the lid meets the rest of the face is actually quite sharp, and so you can use maybe the standard brush or something to define a plane, or like a trim dynamic if you even wanted to make it even sharper. Just something to keep in mind. And the way that the top and the bottom lid they meet, and the way they sit around the caruncular is also very, very different. For some people, like with this sculpt, the inside of the eye is actually very pronounced. For some people, the top lid goes over the lower lid. You have that especially in Asian people, where the top lid will be a lot more pronounced. For some, it just fades into nothing. For both of them, and the caruncular is what's most defined. So that part is really sort of open to interpretation.
And whenever we're doing this, we can't stress this enough. Reference. Everything here is based on reference. Whenever I'm doing this, I have a peer ref open or second monitor, whatever you prefer, and just source it from reference.
Another thing you can keep in mind here as well for the eye is the sort of the shape of the lid. You will have, it's a trick I use specifically for men and women. For the top lid, towards the inside of the eye, I tend to make like a little angle, like you can see here right above the iris now. This can be shifted to, you can maybe shift it a little in or shift it a little out, but keeping this as a more angular shape helps sell it more of a manly shape, and softening it up can make it a little more feminine. And an important note actually is right there where you see the eyeball, where the iris and the pupil is, that will actually deform the lid. So if you make your character look in a certain direction, that's going to deform that lid. So if the lid if you imagine the lid wrapping around a perfect sphere, where the iris is, there's a small bump, just because the eyeball itself is not a perfect sphere. It gets deformed a little bit. So that actually goes in and deforms the lid. And you can see that in people if they close their eyes and then look around with closed eyes.
Yeah, and also one of the reasons is because you have we aren't seeing it here because we don't have transparency in ZBrush.
Yeah.
But you have the cornea on top as well.
Yeah.
Which basically has the opposite shape of the current eyelid or current eye, which just bulges out a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, if ZBrush would get their act together and have proper transparency in the report, we would probably add that as well.
That'd be cool.
That'd be really cool.
This area is actually quite tricky to get right, where the way that something wrinkles. Also because, depending on your reference, this changes so much.
Yeah.
Like, people wrinkle in very different ways in this area. But getting these kind of old wrinkles is can be quite tricky, the way they sort of meet up.
And this is also where cultural factors and the climate as well is very different. If you're living in Scandinavia, where there's not a lot of sun, trust me, then you probably wouldn't get wrinkles from the sun. But if you're living in Australia, where there's a lot of sun, you would get completely different wrinkles. Well, not necessarily different, you would just get a lot more of them.
Yeah. Gotta get that SPF 50.
Yes. Yeah, that's how I'm running it. I don't go into the sun without SPF 50.
I found out you can get moisturizer with sunscreen in it.
Oh, yeah, a lot of them do.
Pretty smart.
It's pretty handy. Yeah, the biggest FPS I saw was 110.
Whoa!
And I don't know why you would need that.
Jesus.
You can probably literally walk on the surface of the sun for that.
You can be the sun.
Yeah. Now we're just going over everything with the clay build-up brush. You can see here that we aren't really using the smooth brush at all in this entire video. This is purely clay build-up and just going lower and lower with the intensity just to refine it. I really like this, as you get this really organic and nice result. So just getting closer and closer and more and more refinement. And you could basically go subdivide this to 100 million and you can just keep on going. Not saying you should, because that would be insane. A few million is plenty for this.
Yeah. Another little tip for the inside of the eye here is that if you look at it from the side, the inside of the eye will actually be sort of recessed into the skull quite a bit deeper than most people realize. And a lot of people struggle with having flat looking eyes, and that's simply because the inside and also the outside of the eye don't wrap around appropriately. Like they don't wrap around enough.
Yeah.
So you don't get that curve that you see here.
I guess you're just trying to make the skin feel more organic, like it's actual skin and not just some, I don't even know, like silicone on top or something, but it's actually deformable skin. We did for the left and the right side of the eye, just really trying to get the overlap going. And that's, again, purely based on a reference. That's not something that I wouldn't necessarily thought about if I was just sculpting an eye from scratch. And what I would recommend you doing, at least particularly if you're a beginner, is to just watch this video and then sculpt an eye, and then sculpt another eye, sculpt 10 eyes, and then go back to the video and watch it. Because there's so much subtlety in sculpting it that you can't perceive everything at once. Yeah. And whenever you are sculpting an eye, just save the project or C tools or whatever it is, save screenshots, because you're going to be progressing really fast. You look at the eye now and you're like, nice, you've done a good job. But if you keep doing this, the second eye is going to be way better.
Yeah.
And it's one of these where it can be hard to say why it's better. But the next eye you're doing, it's just a bit more subtlety and a bit more refinement, and then it just keeps getting better. And I really like doing these out of context studies where it's just an eye. It's not connected to the face at all, because now you can focus purely on the eye. You can focus on the caruncula and how the eyelids come together and fatty pads and all that. If you're doing a full face study, that's really useful as well. But a lot of your effort is going to be spent on balancing the different parts. Here, the eye isn't too big or too small compared to the nose, because there is no nose. You can focus on one part of it. So if you were to do a lot of these out of context studies and then go back to sculpting a human face where, a human head where everything is, you'll probably see that sculpt will be a lot better, because now you understand the eye a lot better. You can be a lot more efficient as well.
The skin you have around the eye here is actually very, very thin. And that sort of, especially when it comes to the inside part, the one that's closer to the nose, that part of the skin gets really, really thin, and it keeps thinning as you grow older, and it keeps getting more and more saggy. So the kind of wrinkles that can form in there can also be quite interesting. And they can be quite tricky to get right as well.
Yeah, they really can be. And you get wrinkles basically in areas which deforms a lot. On top of your head, if you're bald, you aren't going to see any wrinkles, because there's nothing deforming there. But if around the eye, around the eye and mouth might be the areas which deform the most on the entire body. Because every time you move your lips at all, or your face at all, you're basically moving it around there. So that's also why you have really thin skin. Because if you had super heavy leathery skin, it would require a lot more energy to to actually move it around. And one of the reasons as well why we define the bones so early is that you can skin wrapping around bone behaves very differently from skin wrapping around other skin. There is just a different feel to it. It's kind of like if you have like a tablecloth wrapping over a really hard table versus wrapping over like really soft duvets or whatever. There's just a very different kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
This is the part I enjoy the most, which you're just going in and you're just refining it. Everything has kind of been laid out now. Now it's just make it look good. The hardest part of any sculpt for me is always the beginning. It's always the blocking in part where you gotta refine stuff like, you gotta get the main volumes right, the proportions and everything. So hard to get right. But this stage, that's a lot easier. Go in, zoom into it, get close, refinement.
Yeah, because most, all the big shapes, all the design, all the hard decisions have already been made. This is more about, filling in the blanks that are there.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, we use this analogy in some of our other videos as well, where in the beginning you got to do the line drawing, but now you're just coloring in.
Yeah.
And as long as you don't color outside of the lines, then you're good.
And now you basically have a kid's coloring book. You just gotta fill it in, and then you're good.
One thing I'm always thinking about when I'm sculpting regions like this, or sculpting in general, but particularly these regions now, is the gravity of the skin. People tend to forget that skin actually gets quite heavy, and as stuff gets quite heavy, it just goes to the ground, based on the rules of gravity.
Gravity is pretty smart.
Gravity is pretty smart.
Yeah, so what you'll often see with heavier wrinkles is that the fat in the skin tends to accumulate at the bottom, and that's why you get this more prominent bulge at the bottom of the wrinkle. The same thing with the hooded eyelids wouldn't really be an issue in space.
No.
So just kind of like flap around. Maybe they would actually be more annoying. Because they go like flop, flop, flop.
Yeah, you would need like special eyelid masks in place. Yeah, also, the heavier the skin gets, the difference in texture would be, because you might have more oil build up certain places. If you use moisturizer versus sunscreen or whatever, you might have more build up of that. If you have makeup, there might be more of that stuff building up. There might be more dirt going there. In general, it would be a very different look than if you have like an infant.
Yeah, you see that. If you observe that on like old people that drink a lot. I don't know, like you always have the nose and the ear that always get red because of alcohol and stuff. But you have kind of the same thing happening all over the face, where it's kind of like this buildup of stuff, and you just get more and more dirt caught in your pores. And as your pores get more and more blocked up, and as you get older, because the pores keep growing as well, they become more and more prominent. This is also, again, one of those maybe observations for me, is that I feel like pores on men can be more prominent, whereas on women, especially if you're sculpting or something, maybe you want to limit the size of the pores that you do on women.
I'm curious how much of that, because I've observed the same thing, but I'm curious how much of that is women clean their pores with products and men just go, nah.
Like for me and my girlfriend, for example, I have bigger pores than she does, like quite a lot actually, which is interesting, both on my hands, legs, and face. So there it's quite distinct. Whether it's the case for a lot of people, I don't know, but I feel like it's an observation I've made.
Interesting with pores as well, because number one sculpting mistakes from beginners, at least we say number one a lot, there are many number ones, is you add pores too early. Whenever we're talking about details, we gotta have details in your model, but details can just be observing stuff.
Yeah.
You don't want to put in pores, high frequency details, because the model isn't done yet.
Yeah.
Currently, we spent like maybe an hour or so on a model. You can't add pores and that kind of stuff to it because this underlying surface isn't there.
Yeah, pores shouldn't even be on your mind.
No.
You shouldn't, because it's such a small detail, unless there's something very distinct, like an observation I made with my grandpa, for example. I did a bust of him years ago, and his nose is, quite frankly, disgusting. It's, first of all, he drinks a lot of wine and stuff, so it tends to...
Oh, that's not good.
And he's a sailor, and, he was beat by the sun all the time. And so his nose has grown quite a lot, and he's old. And the pores on his nose are huge. So he gets this, like, lumpy nose-looking thing, right? And that's... Unless it's that, where it's part of the actual shape, then you can focus on it. But for most people, like, when you think about pores... It's an alpha that you slap on top of something, or something you texture in Mari.
Yeah, you really don't want to add that too early. Yeah, it's interesting with also like cultural factors like your diet and particularly alcohol.
Yeah,
I feel that if you look at people who's been like full on alcoholics, they have a lot more like low frequency deformations in their face. Basically, this means you're more lumpy.
Yeah. It's the same thing with people that smoke a lot. It's very, very clear with smokers who smoked, their entire lives. They get to, I would say, they start early. Let's say they start at the age of 16. When they get to around 45 to 50, that's when you start to see signs of it around the mouth. You have a very distinct kind of wrinkling from the constant, like, to think about this, the way wrinkles happen in the face is you doing repeated actions. You smile a lot, that means you squint a lot, so you get like these smiley wrinkles. If you have a cigarette in your mouth 20 times a day, every single day for 50 years, you do the like pouty mouth so many times, right? And that stresses the orbicularis oris in your mouth, which creates wrinkles. So you have this very distinct kind of wrinkling. I don't know if it's also down to like just having smoke in your face all the time. That might also play a factor, but definitely stressing the muscles that creates that.
And it's terrible for you as well.
Yeah, there's also that.
Yeah, this would definitely impact a lot of texture as well. When I was younger, I worked in construction, and you had all these people who, again, they've been smoking since they were like 16, and they've been out in the rain and the cold for like the last 30 years every single day. And you can just tell in their faces. Their faces were just more worn. Like they were more like this guy we're currently sculpting now, which has really heavy, thick, leathery skin.
Yeah.
Because you got to protect yourself from the elements. But if you've been sitting inside a cozy office where it's like 25 degrees for 30 years, never smoked, good diet, you would have a very, very different skin.
Yeah. We have a family friend who's he's a builder, and it's kind of weird. He works with concrete a lot. And, concrete, not very good for your hands.
Not very good for hands.
And he's been a builder for the last, 40 years or something. His hands are beautiful. Because every single day after work, he goes in and then he dips his hands in acid. Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, he dips his hands in acid. Like it's a weak acid, but it's to get rid of all the chemicals, and like it's kind of like exfoliating, but in a weird way. He has really beautiful hands for like a 60-year-old man.
Yeah, most construction workers don't have that.
Yeah.
I worked with a guy he was in his mid-60s at that point, and he would show me, hey, check out my hands, and he would just take out his knife and cut a piece of it out. Just because just cut a bit of skin out, because it was like heavy leather.
Yeah.
And we're like, what did you just do? Because he didn't wear gloves or anything. When I was there, I was a delicate little 16-year-old boy, so I used gloves for everything. But if you don't, and you don't take care of your hands and skin, you
obviously if you wear gloves, you're pussy. That's
clearly.
Because why wouldn't you want hands where you can cut a knife into it and you don't feel it?
Yeah. Feel we're going into more a different kind of tutorial now, but. At least, yeah. I mean, everything is the same, right? If you're out of construction, or you're in the elements, or your hands get exposed to different things, and your eyes as well.
Yeah. Essentially, keep that in mind for whatever story you have or backstory you have for your character, because it impacts them.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't have like a princess who'd been living in a castle for her entire life have the same kind of wrinkles as a construction worker.
No,
basically. Same if you have like a person who's lived in a basement all their lives. If you're texturing, their skin would be very different because there's like never been exposed to sunlight.
Don't recommend that.
No, that's not good. It's all the feral kids and stuff.
Get eyebrows in there as well.
Yeah.
These eyebrows are a bit, they're a bit ghetto.
Just an indication.
Just an indication of where they are.
Yeah.
Because if you shave somebody's eyebrows off, they look a bit weird. So if you want, like for this character here, I might even go bushier than this. Like this guy will be like, we're basically doing like Gandalf's eyes now. So you want to do like big bushy eyebrows for him.
Yeah. Also, something that you can think about when sculpting, especially older people, is bushy eyebrows, and the eyebrows tend to grow, get longer, and thicker sometimes, somehow. Yeah.
And when you're doing eyes as well, we're not doing it with this character, but eyelashes. Remember the characters have eyelashes. This guy here will look a bit too feminine if we gave him eyelashes right now. But particularly if you're doing like a beautiful woman, you want to give them eyelashes.
Yeah, it's something, especially if you're designing a character, and you want it to look more real. Eyelashes are a thing on everyone.
Yes.
You know, men, women, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how hardcore of a biker you're doing. He will always have eyelashes.
Yeah, no hardcore biker is like, check it out, guys. I killed my eyelashes. All right, congrats. Now you get sweat in your eyes more.
Yeah,
good job.
Exactly. Yeah, they're actually very practical.
Yeah, turns out. And just going over it and just refining, getting the skin feeling into it now.
Yeah.
This is one, we could keep refining this for days, but you just got to stop, particularly for this, which is more of a study.
Yeah, the most important features are down, and the indication of wrinkles where we want them are in place now. So